I'm really thrilled to introduce Lisa Russell, who has so many different things, pots on the stove, that it's always hard for me to even remember them all. She has a great initiative called Story Shifter, which is finding content to change the stories that we tell about our lives so that we can in turn change the world. She also has a great, to remind me of the name of your program that you do with the UN. I Sell the Shadow. So she matchmakes artists together with the UN to make content, to get messages across about social issues that NGOs might be interested in telling people about. She's programmed a film festival for Women Deliver, and the first St. Francis College Film Festival, Women's Film Festival. She came here and showed us a preview of that program. She is a one-woman band. She does everything: shoot, edit, runs her own film production company, Lisa Russell Films, and all of that without even going to film school. She started out as someone who was really interested in public health, right? So Lisa, come on up and talk to us about Heroines of Health and about your work. And Gabrielle, you want to come up too, and it'll be a conversation between the two of you.
Can I just get some background like I did yesterday? I don't know if everyone's here. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us and my new friend. So again, my name is Lisa, and I do work as a filmmaker, but I didn't go to film school, and I was interested in public health, but actually, I was actually really interested in working in war zones, which is kind of what I still do now as a filmmaker, I guess. But I was working during the war in Kosovo in 1999 and was witness to hearing these women complaining about journalists who were telling this one-dimensional story about women who were being raped as a tool of war. And the women were actually really upset about it because they said, yes, while this is happening, that's not only what we're about. And so at the end of this war, we fear that we're only going to be remembered as Kosovar women who've been raped, and that's not the reality of who we are. And that just planted a seed in my head that I wanted to tell these stories differently. So I've had an interesting career as a filmmaker, a one-person band working for the United Nations, which I get to do great work. I travel around the world, but it is also a very policy-driven, bureaucratic organization. So to try to be creative and push boundaries in that space has been challenging. And I think the reason why I wear so many different hats is because I'm really trying to push. I'm not following in the footsteps of what they've always done. I'm trying to instigate change within the system. So I bring poets, I bring beatboxers or whatnot to the United Nations and really trying to change the narrative of how they portray people in basically, and to be honest, in brown and black countries. So this film is a film that was executive produced by GE Healthcare. I didn't pitch it. They found me because they know this is the type of work I do. And I ended up going to India, Kenya, and Indonesia to profile these three women, and again, really trying to change the narrative of women in developing countries, that they're not only victims to health crises, but they're also incredible life-saving forces. And so Heroines of Health is about 28 minutes, I think. So we're going to watch that, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use film or arts to create social change. So that's me.
I was on a previous panel, and I just got into conversation with Lisa. My panel, in case you weren't at it, was about women around the world and my work connecting women. That's also why I wrote a book called Celluloid Ceiling, Women Film Directors Breaking Through. That was actually pitched to me by a publisher who approached me because of my work in film, which spans Hollywood and independent and is all around the world. So their pitch to me for that book was women directing different genres. And I said, but women don't direct many genres. They get to direct family films and romantic comedies. So, it's going to be a really short book, and that's not interesting. I want to do a book that's about women directors from every country around the world. And so that's hard to do in one book, but I managed to do it. Then I finished, I was leaving, I was eating a sandwich and running. I met this woman, and I'm still here.
I also have a lot of challenges with certain things. Like, I'm an American. We have so much privilege here in comparison to the rest of the world. So what it does is it frustrates me to come back and actually deal with individuals who are caught up in pettiness, or even, like I'll be blamed. They're not even surprised. I had a really bad experience with GE, really bad. And for me, it's like, because this is my reality, I don't care that you're a corporation. If you do something that's not right, I will let you know. And so sometimes people are like, you're a fighter, you're this, you're principled, you're this. But it's because I think when you're that close to real stuff, this other, I don't know the word, this other like superficial stuff is very difficult for me to deal with. The other thing that I realized is that, I went through a time where I had really bad anxiety, and it's because I don't like flying and I fly all over the world. And the reason why I don't like flying is because I know 3 people who've died in plane crashes. So I'm always on a plane, and when I'm on a plane, I get really, really anxious. But when I come back and I think about these situations that people go through, it motivates me to work harder as the activist part of my filmmaking brain. And also what I realize is that this is just my emotions. This is their life. Like I have no right to be focusing on my emotional reaction to a physical reality that they have to deal with day in and day out, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
Quick question. How did these different communities react when you came to them with the camera and your intentions to film them and see their day-to-day life and get into the privacy of those patients too? How did everybody react when you came to them?
When I first started my film career, again, I didn't go to film school, so I never really thought about being a filmmaker in the traditional sense. So my first shoot, I actually spent a day without a camera going and meeting the women in this hospital that I was filming in. And at one point, I decided to turn the camera around and let the women interview me, because I felt that evened out the power imbalance of me being an American, Western educated woman coming into a place of extreme poverty. And it was actually a really great learning experience. Like, it taught me a lot about power, like, whether you're working as a humanitarian aid worker or a filmmaker in these environments, there is a clear power imbalance. And because you're working in sort of the humanitarian sort of circle, it gets excused. Like, people who do harmful stories are not really criticized or confronted because they're doing it with good intentions. And good intentions don't translate to correct things. So I'm very sensitive when I walk into a community with a camera, extremely sensitive. And I actually did a film where I was like, I don't want to do any more stories about, girls facing challenges. Like, I'm tired of telling those stories. So this one organization, I said, if you let me do the story differently, I'll do it. And so what I ended up doing is co-writing the script with 2 girls in Guatemala, and then basically allowing them to play out in front of the camera their own stories. So they were telling their own stories, but not from the technical standpoint, because there's a lot of programs that believe in what's called participatory filmmaking, where you just give cameras to people and you go and let them document. But the reality is the quality of those films or videos aren't very high, and the distribution isn't always effective. Like, nothing happens. It's like an arts and craft kind of project. So I'm very conscious, and in fact I do workshops around what I call narrative justice and responsible storytelling, and how to retain the dignity of people who you're filming. There's a lot of strategic decisions I made in this film that might not be apparent to most people. But, for example, I'll just give you kind of a basic one. I wanted to break every stereotype there was about women and health in developing countries. So showing the women as women first before women being like affected by ill health, men who care about their children in Kenya, what's the other one? The husband supporting the women. But these are all universal obstacles that women working in global health face. And there's actually a huge movement right now trying to improve gender equity in global health leadership, because most of the top leadership positions are held by men, even though women make up the majority of the healthcare force. So I know I'm like telling a very long answer to your question, but any filmmaker who wants to go into these environments, I think needs to really do some self-inner reflection in terms of understanding your privilege and your responsibility for going in and telling these stories. So, yeah.
So something I found a lot, although I don't work, so I work more in narrative storytelling, but just on a very practical level, this even happened just to me in Pakistan. I find that, like, before the people that I'm going to meet in countries that might be thought of as very disenfranchised, I've learned to say, please don't put me, I grew up in a farm in the west of Ireland. They're like, oh, really? I say, yeah, and we had a dirt floor. So don't put me up in anywhere fancy. In fact, I'd love to just stay with anyone. I said to the people I was dealing with in Pakistan, because what I found was that their idea of what I would like, the budget that was very small often to begin with. I would be in some very formal hotel that wasn't even that great, because they're often not great. I mean, the presidential suite is like as big as this table. And so I've learned to kind of dispel a hierarchy or a preconception. And then, often when I'm there, people will say, oh, we were really afraid, or and this is actually not working in profoundly impactful areas, that you're working in, although I think storytelling is the most profoundly impactful route. It's at the root of what you're doing. What I'm saying is I wasn't actually doing stories about healthcare or whatever, but what I learned was some of the same things, that I want to make it cheap for them, or not, where they don't spend a lot of money or presume that they're going to have to do certain things because of me. Because I always point out, as soon as I arrive, I'm the visitor. So can you help me? Like when I arrived in Islamabad, because of what I've read about Islamabad, being here in the States, I actually thought, I've worked in Saudi, and you do start putting on a full covering, as you're going into Riyadh. So I thought that was what Pakistan was like, and it isn't at all. As you saw if you saw my panel and I showed the promo from the festival there, many women are not veiled, and they're not. But I've learned to make sure as soon as I arrive, what's appropriate, what should, and then you quickly pick up. So you kind of I go in always, I really have found I go in with the idea that I have a lot more to learn, that I do bring skills, and my job is, it's exhausting, it's challenging, but I really love it. But I am going in to learn, and what I learn and bring back is tremendous. And I want to state that up front as soon as I arrive into a new situation. And I think the situations you arrive in are even more challenging, because mine has certain luxury of just being, let's tell our stories, rather than you're funded by a huge American corporation that deals in healthcare to tell a narrative.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and also I'll say that, a lot of my projects, I'm hired by the United Nations, and there's certain criteria, certain things I have to abide by security-wise. Like when I shot in Lebanon, when they put me into a hotel, I have to stay between the 3rd floor and the 5th floor, high enough that in case there's a bomb in the lobby, I can jump out the window, and low enough that if there's anything going on, you know what I mean, so I can be safe. They also will put me in 5-star hotels, and initially I revolted against that. Like in the Congo, I was put in this hotel where it was all businessmen. I'm the only woman, and you talk about Me Too moments and all of that. Like, I've had my share of stories about being a woman traveling in these environments by myself. But, this was a highly business thing. They were dealing in diamonds and all this stuff. War was like on, about to hit. And I basically checked myself out and rechecked into a hotel that was a nice hotel, but locally owned. Because what I did come to terms with is that because I am by myself, I cannot get sick ever. And I cannot get my equipment stolen. So while there have been opportunities like Mrs. Rohani, I had to hike an hour and a half up that mountain to go shoot her and stay the night with her because you can't access it by bicycle or motorbike or car because of those bamboo bridges. I don't know if you caught that in her introduction. So you can only walk up that mountain. So I had to have people carry my equipment. We had to go up there, and the weather was really, really bad. And I was like, I don't know if I should do this because this is my line of thinking. If I go up there and I slip or I fall and I hurt myself, I'm not going to meet my deadline that GE has put on me, and I won't get paid, and I need to get paid. So I had to make, a decision like, is the safety concerns worth me doing this in this weather? But of course, I wanted the story so badly that I decided to go, and it ended up being the best part of this entire shoot, like hanging out with the community up there and having dinner, and it was just amazing. But another story that I'll just quickly tell you is that I think also working in these environments, like I really, if you look at the trajectory of my career, like I was a dancer. I actually was in a hip hop troupe and I wanted to be a dancer, but my mother, who was like a 8th grade educated waitress, said, I didn't work this hard to pull us out of poverty for you to be a dancer. So then I was going to be a doctor and work in the emergency room, which I loved because obviously I'm an adrenaline junkie. And so that then turned into me freaking out and moving cross country to then getting exposed to the sort of global AIDS crisis and me wanting to work in that, then wanting to work in war zones, then turning into filmmaking. But along the whole trajectory, I've always sort of been like a justice-based person. I have a red tattoo on my arm because red is my favorite color, but also I've just done so much justice work. So I think when you expose yourself to so many injustices, it makes you stronger in your convictions. And so an experience I had that was like where I almost quit my career. I've almost done it like 3 times, but I was interviewing a man in Malawi who was dying of AIDS. Like, he was so sick. His daughter had died. Her husband had died, and he was left taking care of his 2 granddaughters who were in the hut with us when I was interviewing him in tatted up dresses, who weren't able to go to school because they couldn't afford the school fees. And meanwhile, his wife was in the garden trying to be able to grow food when there was a huge drought in southern Africa. So somebody who has AIDS or living with HIV, who is lucky enough to have medication, needs to have enough nutrients for that medication to work in their body. But being in southern Africa at this time, small farms were dying, and so people weren't able to get the nutrition that they needed. So this is just like, if you talk about global health obstacles, this family just faced one after. It's like a snowball, just really horrific. And I spent maybe like 2.5 hours sitting on a stool using the light coming into the hut there's nothing in the hut. Like, there's a mat that he's laying on. He's obviously struggling to breathe. He's like sick, really sick. And he gave me such a really genuine and intimate interview, and I was just like, thank you for taking your time to tell me your life story. And he says, no, thank you. Like, you're the first American I've ever seen in our village in Malawi. You've come all this way. And I was like, no, but you spent time telling, so we're doing this back and forth. No, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. And I'm getting irritated because in my mind, again, as like a social justice person, I'm like, my country doesn't spend enough money on international, AIDS prevention treatment or food aid or whatever it is that our trade agreements keep your country in poverty. And so my equipment cost more than your entire AIDS treatment for a year. So stop thanking me. And I remember this very clearly. And I went to the SUV, of course, the fancy UN vehicles that they give you. I put my luggage in the back, and I was just like, I can't do this. Like, ethically, I'm struggling with this responsibility. And over time, I have resolved that guilt of doing it by becoming more, I think, responsible in what I do and thinking more clearly about my responsibility and my role, and which is why the conversation about sort of the growing trend of storytelling at the UN is being led by people who are not true storytellers is frightening to me. But yeah, I think that I don't even remember what the question was, but it was a good one.
But of course, you are doing so much. I mean, not to, because you were going back and forth getting irritated, and I understand that. But you're doing so much because the story is so powerful. When I lived in Singapore for several years, and while I was there, actually, I was extremely ill, very seriously ill. I was treated by a doctor who I was asked to speak about how films affect public health. And I'm not in public health. So I said, I'm not really in this field, but when I was telling the doctor who treated me in Singapore, he said, no, I want you to do this because the biggest public health crisis in Singapore is HIV, and it's not really discussed at all. And I would like you to do it. And he was he was Javanese, and he was very deferential, and so I said I would, and I showed a clip from Philadelphia. If you know the movie, right, Philadelphia, and I showed the clip where Tom Hanks is at a party and he has the Kaposi's, he has a lesion, and he's saying something to someone who suddenly sees it and realizes. And I showed this, and then I talked about Lorenzo's Oil and a number of other films. And actually, in my research and doing it, I realized, wow, these films reach so many more people. And actually, I also found out that most public health information is online. That's how most people learn. So I realized how powerful this was. I had about 20 minutes to do this presentation. And when I arrived, everyone was talking to me and asking me about myself, and the doctor who treated me wasn't there, but I met a lot of other health professionals, and it was all going great. But after my presentation, not one person said anything to me, and I experienced a complete, that this was so, not on. I don't know really what they thought I was going to talk about public health, because films like Philadelphia, and you know the films that changed your thinking about very serious issues in life. It's it's the most powerful tool. So I kind of didn't mind when no one talked to me at all, and then a doctor from Scotland came up and said, "Oh, you really blew it," But, then a few people talked to me, and I'm glad I did it. But ultimately, whatever the experience of feeling unequal, we're sitting here today, really, I haven't seen this, I just sat there. I'm a better person for the work that you did. And so we've got to keep telling these stories, and stories are so powerful. The story of what happened is what people believe. Yes. And that's why we have an incredible responsibility. And that is not fiction or non-fiction. That's not, you made this film, I've made films that are, they're entertainment, but, there's something else going on. It's the most powerful tool, I think, and that's why it's my life, because I came to realize that. Yes, if you can tell me a story, you can make me think about how a Washington lawyer who's handsome and white and very successful has a disease, the same disease that this man in a hut with nothing in Malawi. It's the same disease that is killing both people. But, Tom Hanks is appealing to a lot of people, and they had to rethink. And I talked a bit about this. So it's the most powerful tool in whatever genre or field it's being used. Right.
Yeah, and I mentioned to her that I'm really interested in doing a fiction film. So I'm trying to write and I have such a like bank of stories that were never made it into my films, that I would love to find a way, because health is not always appealing. Like the USC's film school, where I did like 2 workshops last year, they have a screening series, and like they're the number 1 or number 2 film school in the country. And when I told them what this film was, they're like, yeah, we don't really program health related films because we find that people won't come. And that's so unfortunate. But I feel like maybe because historically the narrative of health related stuff has been boring or not been interesting. So yeah.
It's such an interesting skill set to be so brave and courageous and yet so sensitive. You're really balancing from both ends of the spectrum. I mean, emotionally. Woo.
That, I was only at that hospital for a weekend, so you don't script these things, right? And even in Indonesia, that woman was the second woman who was hemorrhaging, and women die from hemorrhaging all over the world. And it happened to 2 women while I was in that clinic in one day. But yeah, I think traveling as an American and having those experiences, not dropping in and being like a medical tourist or whatever, but just seeing the reality of people, how can it not make you sensitive, or maybe on the other side jaded against stuff that
it's great, but more things go wrong and take longer. It's not easy at all. It's definitely not easy. So what I always want is to get something. I'm always looking like, what can I learn from this? Because so many things go wrong. So I was telling a story, actually, which I won't tell, but it's very similar to the one you told. And it's about working in a Hollywood studio. It's exactly the same story. So one of the things you learn from this is that when you're drawing up contracts, you specify in the contract you have you have a lawyer do it, and you specify that every time it's shown, what your credit is. And when I was telling my story to Tim and Megan and some students out there, I told a story about how I actually did understand what was going to happen to me, and I got a 1-page agreement with a writer of the script saying whatever happened to that script, I would go with it as a producer because I developed it. And then sure enough, as soon as the film was funded for $23 million, the producer met with me because I'd worked on the script for a couple of years, and he said, we'll see you at the premiere. And I knew that meant never. Like he wouldn't see me anywhere ever. So I just pushed the 1 page. It was just 1 sentence because I didn't have a lawyer. It just said, if anything ever happens with this script, so-and-so, written by so-and-so, then Gabrielle Kelly will travel with it as a producer and get a producer's credit. But we both signed it. And I only knew how to do that because I was working with very top level people, and instead of just spending all my time thinking about scripts and stories, I actually read every contract, because I quickly saw that an oral agreement is worth the paper it's written on. It's worth nothing. No one ever saying like, you're great, it's going to be great. No, it doesn't mean anything, because also in film, it's a very hierarchical business and people don't have power. Someone saying, you're great, it's going to be great. Like, are you the head of GE? I mean, if now, to analyze that, because it's an interesting case study, someone's saying to you, hey, Lisa, it's great, we're going to do everything for you, you're a powerful filmmaker. Like, now hey, that person doesn't matter, because unless it's on paper or it's the controlling entity, it doesn't mean anything. So you have to upfront make sure that you know that you're going to get a credit and put it on paper. And even then, by the way, I've had credits on movies. In feature films, you can still have a credit. You can be the producer, for example, and no one will ever talk to you or ask you anything. And I've even had in my contract, something like, in hiring a director, we'll consult with you. And then this would be the consultation. Yes. Gabrielle, hi, it's so-and-so. Here are the 3 directors. Which one do you think we should have? And then I go, well, I think so-and-so. They go, okay, that's your consultation. And then they pick someone else. So it's a brutal, I mean, in my area of work, that world, it's a very brutal world. That's why in my book, I wrote the chapter about Hollywood, because I've worked there for 20 years and I know it. But you know what? It's not really any different than GE. People will, it's interesting, they'll steal your work and completely obliterate you while saying it's nothing. You know, it's like anyone could do it. It's like, okay, you do it then. You go to Indonesia and Africa. You do it. No, they're not going to do it. And it's simultaneous. It's very paradoxical, right? It undermines you and takes away your work while saying your work is nothing, while entering your work.
You know, I've been encouraged to try to do a fictional film, do a short, do whatever, and just see if I can go in that world. And I never wanted to, because I knew that the culture of Hollywood would be something that I could not handle. But I do feel like, and I might be wrong, but I feel like this is the year where women filmmakers interested in studio work or interested in Hollywood or fiction or whatever, this is the year to do it. So this is why I feel like I'm finally going to, this is the year. Yeah.
It's now. It's now. It's like after so long, now is the time. You know, it's not going to be easy, because it's never easy when other people are losing out, when anyone who's had power, you know, it's just not easy. People don't want to give it up. It's fun being a film director. There's only so many great shows, you know, that need directors. So do people who have been doing this want to just be fair? Not really, because you make, you know, $1,000 and up for doing a pilot, directing a pilot, and then every time that show is aired, you get tons of money, you get residuals, you meet people on planes and say you're a director, and everyone's like, wow. I mean, you get everything, so why would people want to give this up? They don't want to give it up. But you're absolutely right, Lisa, and you all out there, this is the time to do it. There's sort of an opening and a change and a kind of, you know, powerful support all around where, you know... and
not just for women, people of color, young people. I mean, what's her name? Lena Waithe is on the cover of Vanity Fair right now. I mean, there's just a shift. So I agree with that. I think the doors are opening for more diverse types of films and filmmakers.
Any other questions? I hope you're going to join me in giving a really big hand to our panel.